Welcome back, everyone. It is Mike from Mana Hoarders, bringing you another episode of Let Them Fight. In this episode, I am running Slimefoot and Squee, Damien is running Drana and Linvala, Nick is running Galta and Mavrin, and Dustin is running Yargle and Multani. We hope you enjoy this episode of
Let Them Fight!
And so the game begins with Dustin winning the die roll. I play a forest for turn and then tap 2 to cast my Undead Butler, milling 3. Dustin does accidentally mill 3 cards since I didn't specify it was only me that mills 3. Nick plays a Plains and then taps 2 to cast an Idol of Oblivion before passing to Damien. Damien plays a Swamp and then pays 2 to cast a Tocatli Honor Guard. I move to combat and swing my Undead Butler at Dustin for 1. He takes the damage and I pass the turn. Nick plays a Forest and then pays 3 to cast King Darien. Damien pays 2 to cast a Potion of Healing. Moving to combat, he swings at me with his Tocatli Honor Guard. I take the 1 damage and Damien passes the turn. Dustin plays a Rogue's Passage as his land for turn and then pays 4 to cast Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma. Before Dustin's turn ends, I cast a Reckoner's Bargain, sacrificing my Undead Butler. I gain life equal to its mana value and I draw 2 cards. I play a Mountain as my land for turn and then tap all 3 of my lands to cast my commander Slimefoot and Squee. He enters the battlefield and I create a Saproling, but they do remind me that Damien's Tocatli Honor Guard turns off ETB effects. Nick pays 2 to cast a Veteran Soldier. Damien pays 4 mana to cast his commander, Drana and Linvala. I play an Evolving Wilds, and then I tap in and sacrifice it to go get a Swamp. Moving to combat, I swing Slimefoot and Squee at Dustin. I get the Saproling off of the attack trigger. Dustin chooses not to block and takes the 3 damage. In my second main phase, I cast a Roots of Wisdom, milling 3 cards and then getting a Swamp back from among them to my hand before passing the turn. Nick casts a Nature's Lore, getting him a Forest. He then pays 3 mana to cast a Bess before passing the turn. Damien pays 3 to cast a Commander Sphere. He then taps the Commander Sphere and 2 more lands to cast a Ghostly Prison. Damien moves to combat and swings his commander at Nick for 3 in the air. Nick takes the 3 and then Damien passes the turn. Dustin pays 5 mana to cast a Psychosis Crawler before passing the turn. I pay 4 mana to cast Rankle, Master of Pranks, and then immediately move to combat, swinging Rankle at Nick and Slimefoot at Dustin, making me another Saproling in the process. When Rankle deals combat damage, I make each player discard a card and sacrifice a creature. Nick activates the ability of King Darien, giving him a 1/1 counter and creating a creature token. He then taps his Idol of Oblivion to draw a card. He moves to combat and swings King Darien at Damien, paying the 2 for Ghostly Prison. Damien takes the damage, and then Nick passes a turn. Damien pays 6 to recast his commander before passing the turn. Dustin pays a green to cast a crop rotation, sacrificing a forest. With the crop rotation still on the stack, Dustin casts a Fatal Push, destroying my Rankle. Then off of the crop rotation, Dustin searches for a Bojuka Bog, exiling my graveyard. As my commander moves zones, I decide to move it to the command zone instead of to exile. Moving to combat, Dustin swings Goreclaw at me, which I do not block, and I take the 5 damage before he passes the turn. I don't have much on my turn, so I cast a Rampant Growth, going to get a forest before passing the turn. Nick pays 7 mana to cast his commander, Galta and Maverin. Moving to combat, he swings his King Darien at me. I take the damage, and then Nick passes the turn. Damien pays 3 mana to cast Succumb to Temptation. He then pays 2 mana to cast a Revitalize to gain 3 life and draw a card. He then pays 1 mana to cast a Porphyry Nodes. Moving to combat, Damien swings his commander at Nick, who takes the 3 damage before Damien passes the turn. Dustin pays 4 mana to cast his commander, Yargle and Multani. Dustin moves to combat and swings Goreclaw at me. I don't block, so I take the 5 damage before Dustin passes the turn. I pay 3 to put down my Fell Stinger, but I do not get to use the exploit since Damien is still turning off all of the ETB abilities. I then pay 3 to cast a Benefaction of Ronus, revealing the top 5 cards of my library. From among those cards, I put a Glowspore Shaman into my hand, and then I pass the turn. Nick moves to combat, swinging his commander and his King Darien at Damien, and then his token at me. He pays the 4 mana to get around the Ghostly Prison. When he goes and declares his attackers, this triggers his Veteran Soldier as well as his commander. He has the Veteran Soldier go off first, creating 3 1/1 tokens that are attacking each of his opponents. He then resolves his commander's ability, creating 5 vampire tokens. After the dust settles, all the tokens are created and the damage is dealt, Nick taps his Idol of Oblivion to draw a card before passing the turn. At the beginning of Damien's upkeep, his Porphyry Nodes trigger goes off and he destroys one of my Saprolings. Damien then pays 5 mana to cast a Sanguine Bond. He then follows this up by casting a Creeping Bloodsucker. He pays 1 mana and sacrifices his Healing Potion to gain 3 life, and from his Sanguine Bond trigger drains Nick for 3 before he passes the turn. Dustin pays 3 to cast a Freelance Muscle before passing the turn. I cast a Vile Entomber. Whenever it enters the battlefield, I search my library for a Necron Deathmark and put that card into my graveyard. I follow this up by casting a Glowspore Shaman, putting a forest back on top of my library before passing the turn to Nick. Nick starts his turn by paying 7 to cast an Avenger of Zendikar, making him 7 plant tokens. He follows this up by playing his land for turn, giving all of those newly formed plant tokens a 1/1 counter. Nick taps his Idol of Oblivion to draw a card. Moving to combat, Nick swings all 4 of his life-linking vampires at me. I block 2 of them and then take the 4 damage. Nick gains 8 life and then passes the turn. At the beginning of his upkeep, Damien's Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each of us and he gains 3 life. Then from the Sanguine Bond trigger, he has Dustin lose 3 life. Then from the Porphyry Nodes trigger, Damien destroys his Creeping Bloodsucker. Damien pays 4 mana to cast a Windborn Muse. Moving to combat, Damien swings his commander at Nick, who takes the 3 damage, and then Damien passes the turn. Dustin swings at Nick with his freelance muscle, who blocks with one of his creature tokens. In his second main phase, Dustin casts a Return of the Wild Speaker targeting his freelance muscle, so he draws 22 cards. From the mountain of cards he just drew, Dustin plays a forest before passing the turn. I begin my turn by casting a Golgari Germination. I then cast Dread Return, targeting my Necron Deathmark. It enters the battlefield and I destroy Nick's Avenger of Zendikar, and I choose to mill 3 myself. Using the flashback cost of the Dread Return, I sacrifice all 3 of my creatures. This in turn gets me 3 Saproling tokens from the Golgari Germination. I then go to my graveyard and get back a Sepulchral Primordial. From the ETB, I take Nick's Avenger of Zendikar, generating 8 plant tokens. I get Damien's Creeping Bloodsucker, and I take Dustin's Titanoth Rex. And then I pass the turn over to Nick. Nick pays 6 mana to cast a Pollen Bright Wings, enchanting his commander. Moving to combat, Nick sends his commander at me in the air, and with no flying blockers, I take the damage. He creates 13 Saproling tokens off of the Pollen Bright Wings trigger. He then taps his Idol of Oblivion to draw a card before passing the turn. At the beginning of Damien's upkeep, his Porphyry Nodes trigger goes off and he destroys one of my plants. Damien pays 5 to cast a Sunscorched Regent. He follows this up by casting a Costly Plunder, sacrificing his Commander Sphere to draw 2 cards. He moves to combat and swings at Nick with his commander. Nick takes the 3, and then Damien passes the turn. Dustin begins his turn by casting a Mask of Grizzlebrand, and then he equips it to his commander. Damien gains the 1 life from the Sunscorched Regent trigger, and then deals 1 damage to me from the Sanguine Bond. Dustin moves to combat and swings at me with his commander, and I die to a Flying Frog Elemental Demon. Nick casts a Swiftfoot Boots and then equips it to his commander. Damien gains 1 life from the Sunscorched Regent and then drains Dustin for 1. Moving to combat, Nick carefully decides how wide he wants to go against Dustin. He chooses his attackers and resolves his triggers from his Galta and from his veteran soldier. He makes a total of 28 tokens. And Dustin is eliminated by a giant flying dinosaur vampire. Nick gains 6 life from his life-linking vampire tokens. Damien blocks the 1 token that was coming at him from the veteran soldier trigger. And Nick taps his Idol of Oblivion to draw a card, before passing the turn. We do remember, however, that Nick should have made 13 Saprolings from his Galta dealing combat damage from the Pollen Bright Wings trigger. At Damien's upkeep, the Porphyry Nodes trigger resolves and Nick destroys one of his tokens. Damien pays 3 mana to cast a Talisman of Nurgle. Damien then casts a Glass Cast Heart. Damien then casts an Oversold Cemetery. Moving to combat, Damien attacks with his commander. Nick takes the 3 damage and Damien creates a blood token. Nick starts his turn by casting a Shelter targeting Galta, giving it protection from white, and drawing a card. He then pays 4 mana to get around the Windborn Muse and Ghostly Prison, and swings at Damien for lethal commander damage with Galta and Maverin. And just like that, Nick claims the win by stomping over us with an army of vampires riding on dinosaurs. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see face off in the future. We really appreciate all of your support.